Actually, it was probably better because then I would be less nervous. I wouldn't have to sit there as long while you're going through the readings and not concentrate on the readings. So, my name is Denise, and I am a sex and lust addict from Chino. First, I'd like to say thank you to the committee for asking me to share my experience, strength, and hope with you here tonight. I'm very honored to be able to do that. And before I get started, it's a practice of mine to always ask my higher power for a little guidance and direction. Because if I plan my speech out, then I would get caught up in grandiosity and ego. I mean, I used to think that because I'm a female, I have no ego, but I'm going to tell you I have a very big ego. So if you'll just take a few moments with me, and anyone who does know the third step prayer, join in with me if you'd like. God, I offer myself to Thee, to build with me and do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do Thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of Thy love and Thy way of life. May I do Thy will always. Amen. Thank you. Okay. First of all, to let you know, I just went completely blank. I looked up and I saw all these people and I went completely blank. How did I get here? I did earn my seat, and it took me a long time to accept the fact that I earned my seat here. I did not want to be a sexaholic. I did not want to speak from a podium and tell you about my sex addiction. But I have learned that it's from the people around me that have shared their own experience, strength, and hope that relieved me of the shame and the guilt that I was carrying, that would not allow me to share my own. And so from what was passed on to me, I have to pass it on to somebody else. The topic of this very conference is awesome, working with others, because I believe that that is the gift and the only way that we remain sober a day at a time. It has proven itself over and over again, and we can see that by the number of people sitting in this room tonight, in both programs. And that's how it works. And my whole life I spent trying to do everything on my own. And so when I came to 12-step programs, it was very foreign to me to have to reach out. And I didn't want to do that because I believed that I was supposed to be strong enough to take care of everything on my own. And so it was very, very difficult for me to let go of that. And that takes me back to when I first started and said that I didn't have an ego. And I really did believe that because I was female, I wasn't supposed to have pride and ego. But it was my pride and ego that kept me out there so long, because I couldn't reach out my hand to somebody else and say, I need help. And thank God that I did, because there was somebody there at the other side. And today I have to be that person on the other side reaching back and saying, yes, you're welcome here. And I know your pain. So I was born into a family of dysfunction and addiction. My father was a violent, abusive alcoholic. He was also a pedophile. My mother had 5 children by the time she was 21 years old, 7 altogether, and I'm number 2 in the lineup. My mother also suffered from sex addiction and still does today. So we have a long history and generations of sex addiction in our family. My father sexually abused me from about 2 years old to 12, and my grandfather also from about 8 years old to 12. And the difference in the two for me was my father was very violent in his acts. He was sadistic. He claimed that I was devil possessed, and he was just trying to drive the devil out of me. But yet my grandfather had a different kind of abuse. He was very gentle and very loving, and I was his princess. And so I had a very confused message about what sex was about. And for me, sex was love, love was sex. And I didn't know anything any different. And my parents because the generations was all revolved around sexual addiction and this problem that went for generations in our families, the people that they associated with all had similar problems, because then, no one would call them on their actions. And so it was pretty much an acceptable way of life. And I had no idea that the things that were going on and the things that I was doing myself were not right, that they weren't acceptable behavior. And so for me, I learned early on about flirtations and seduction, and my idea was I know what men want, and for me to get what I want, I just had to give them what they wanted. And I grew up that way, and for a long time I was out there acting out in my addiction. At about 13 years old, I was introduced to alcohol, drugs, and sex outside the home. And this was a whole new world for me, and it was finally, prior to this point, I used association, and I used fantasy, and I used sex with self in order to escape the reality of what was going on around me. And so now at 13 years old, I found alcohol, drugs, and sex outside the home. And I was in heaven. It relieved me of all the pain that I had going on, and I loved it all. And I lived that way for a very long time. So I started at 13, and I did not get sober in Alcoholics Anonymous until I was 29 years old. So the insanity and the combination of all of those addictions together, I don't even have to tell you. You can just let your imagination run wild. So I was crazy, and I created a lot of havoc in a lot of people's lives, including my own. I was suicidal. I was on a suicidal run for many years, and I really did not care about my life. And I thought that I was just here to exist and to get by. And I needed to find the best way to do that. And for me, it was drugs, alcohol, and sex. And I just simply didn't know that there wasn't any other way. My addictions, of course, led me into marriages and things of that sort, as some of us have run into as well. One day a light bulb went off for me. I had a baby that was now my second child, a couple of months old, and I was coming off a drunk. It was 5 o'clock in the morning. I had been up all night, and I had this little baby by the arms in my face, screaming at this child, how dare you want to eat right now? Don't you know that I've been up all night? And then a light bulb went off and said, you know what, you're creating your family's history. You're reliving the nightmare, and, now you're the perpetrator, although I didn't use those words at that time. So I knew what I had to do was call a sponsor that I had already acquired because I had attempted AA before. And I had about 15 months sobriety when I decided I needed to have an affair. And the only way for me to do that was to drink. So I gave up that AA sobriety in order to satisfy my sex addiction. And that I was only out there a short period of time when I decided to come back to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I called that sponsor who was there for me. And so I spent the next 8 years working a very diligent recovery program in Alcoholics Anonymous, the steps, being of service, doing all of that stuff, and working on a relationship with a higher power. However, I was still fixing my bad feelings with men and sex. And I had no idea that it was related at all to any of this stuff. And for me, it was still very much a way of life. In fact, when I did my 4-step in Alcoholics Anonymous, one of my biggest character defects was lust. And when I read the definition that my sponsor had given me for lust, I said, oh my God, this is love. And I really didn't know. It was the same definition that I had used all along for love. And so it was kind of an awakening then, but I wasn't ready to take a look at it. One of the areas that I got into a lot of trouble with in my acting out is in the workplace. I always had male bosses, and I had this thing with authority figures. And in order for me to be, the best in the workplace, I used all of my methods of flirtations and, seduction and dress and all of that wonderful stuff in order to be well liked by my bosses. I was married twice. Two of those husbands, I've been married 3 times now. 2 of those husbands were former bosses. So I had a history of this. And what got me here was I was now in a job with boss number 7. I was currently in a relationship with boss number 6, who was married when we got started in our relationship. And I started dating him because I didn't want anything at all to do with men, and he was a safe bet. I just wanted to have sex. I didn't want a relationship. And so, it was my God-given right, to have that. And, these things just didn't occur to me, and it's just absolutely amazing to me how this program changes our thinking. So I was in this relationship, and we had been in this relationship for 3 years, and I now had this new boss, number 7, and I felt like I was getting sucked in, that somehow I was getting sucked in, and I felt compelled to be in a relationship with this person, and I could not put into words what was taking place. But I knew that I was in trouble, and I didn't want to jeopardize this relationship with boss number 6, so I decided maybe I should go back to therapy. And my current boyfriend was seeing a therapist who he thought very highly of, and so I went in to see him. And the first thing that he told me to do was go to SLA. And so I thought, well, sex and love addicts, that kind of makes sense. I can deal with that. And so I tried to find one of those meetings, and I went to a couple, but they weren't where they were supposed to be. And my boyfriend was going to SA. So I said, well, what's wrong with SA to this therapist? And he said, well, that would be great. And I really had no idea what I was facing. I really didn't. And when I went to my first meeting, I was terrified. It took me several months, basically, to bring up the courage to go. And I promised my therapist that I would go on this particular night. And I went to the Thursday night meeting in Chino, and I was greeted by a gentleman by the name of Mike. I don't think he's still out there. And he told me that it was not a newcomers meeting and that I could not stay because I had to go to an information meeting. And I was very adamant because I could be real kind of witchy when I wanted to be. And I said, well, I promised my therapist that I would be here, and I am a sex addict or I would not be here. And so his big concern was whether I could identify or not, And for me, it was like, why else would I go to one of those meetings? It is not what I signed up for. Anyways, I identified with what was read. We were reading from the White Book. And I was the only woman at that meeting, and I was very uncomfortable, and I didn't feel very safe. And I just knew that they were all looking at me, but I wouldn't look at anybody. I looked at the floor. And, I had this vision in my mind of what you guys do at SA meetings. If you really think about it, when you don't know anything about this disease, then what you think is, what do they sit around and do? So much to my surprise, we were getting recovery in SA meetings. And they were reading from a book, and I identified with the feelings that were going on in the book. And I bought that book that night, and I took it home, and I read maybe the first 20 pages over the next 2 days. And I went into my therapist, and I had that book, and I had it all highlighted, and I said, oh, my God, I'm on every page. I couldn't believe it. I was absolutely horrified that I fit in this program. And I did not want to belong here, and I fought it tooth and nail, but many of my friends from Chino know that, Gary over here and Steve. and the people that I saw week after week, and I just did not want to belong to Sexaholics Anonymous. And I was still in this relationship, and your sobriety definition was not according to my plan. And I tried really hard to get you to change it, but you weren't going for it. So I struggled for a very long time, and I was in and out, and I also had this huge problem with sex with self. And any time I had feelings that came up, I did not know how to deal with them. I had to relieve those feelings. And for me, it's a big cycle. And what happens for me is I feel shame. And when I feel shame, I move to guilt. And I'm an awful person. And I'm bad. And I'm no good. And when I get into the guilt, then I isolate. Because I don't know how to talk to anybody about what I'm feeling, and sometimes I don't even know what it is I'm feeling. So I have to isolate, which creates loneliness for me. And loneliness brings about pain. And whenever I'm in pain, I resort to fear. And fear for me is panic, sheer panic. And when panic hits, I hear these voices and they scream, get the fix. Get the fix. I don't care what you got to do, get the fix. And so the cycle starts over. You get the fix, the shame, the guilt, the pain, the fear, the fix. And I think our white book puts it very, very well. In order to be free of it, you have to do it. And that was me. And that was probably one of the first things I underlined a couple of times in there. And I wanted all of that to end. I went to a women's retreat, not an essay-related retreat, but a women's Christian retreat. And there was a girl in our group therapy session that got brave enough to talk about, lust. And I had no sobriety at that point, and I was in the big cycle of the shame and the guilt. And I felt, very, very small, and when was I ever going to do it? And I couldn't stop acting out with myself, and if I could do this sobriety thing in the relationship, but then I couldn't do it over here. And then I could do it over here, but I couldn't do it in the relationship. And it was just a constant battle for me. And I was at this retreat, and this woman started talking about it. And my purpose for being at that retreat was to find some female friends. My entire life was associated with men. I did not have female friends. And the biggest reason was I was terrified that they were going to be just like me. And I had no, if I took your husbands or your boyfriends or, you obviously were going to do the same thing to me, and I trusted nobody. I knew that I liked the power and control game with the men, and I could play it well, so I was more comfortable in that arena. But I knew that if I was going to get anywhere in the sobriety thing, I had to start connecting with women. And so my purpose for this retreat was to meet some women friends. And what came out of that retreat was the first women's meeting out in Chino area on Wednesday nights. And 3 of us got together and we put that meeting together. And today we now have as many as 12 attending at one time. Sometimes there's just the original 4, but sometimes it's as big as 12. And it's been an awesome experience. And I knew for me the only way that I was going to get any sobriety was I had to go back and look at what did I do in AA to stay sober? What did I do? And they put me to work immediately. And I knew the only way that I was going to acquire any time or get this program was to get involved. And so I made this meeting my big involvement. And then I started working with the women in the group. And these women that started this thing with me knew my struggle with the sobriety definition. And I would go there and I would complain and I would gripe. And they'd say, we love you. Keep coming back. And I had a desire to make it. I just didn't know how to do it, And then I started reaching out and talking to other women. And I'm going to tell you, that's the biggest gift of sobriety, is to be able to share what happened to me when I see somebody hurting and crying. And I can say, Peggy, I felt that exact same way. I know your pain, but you can do it. And that's what people said to me. You can do it. And so finally, I got married to this man that I had been in the relationship for a very long time. And we got married last November. And he also is a member of this wonderful program of essay. I can now call it a wonderful program of essay. I mean, it's okay for me to belong here now. And it's mostly because I have acquired so many friends and close, valuable relationships. They're not surface relationships. I had to do a big change. I had to quit dressing the way I was dressing. I mean, these girls, come on girls, tell them. They didn't even recognize me tonight. You know, my hair is down, I wear no makeup, I wear my husband's jeans and a t-shirt, you know, and so it's like, whoa, is that you, Denise? But anyways, that's the extreme I had to go to for me, because I was used to dressing up and being the show, and I wanted the attention. And now I'd rather just kind of blend in and talk about real feelings. Because for me today, those feelings that I talked about before are gifts. And if I can remember them all, shame for me is about humility and humanity. Guilt today is about amends. Loneliness today means I need to reach out or reach in. And pain is growth and healing. And fear is wisdom and knowledge. And the last one is anger, of which I don't talk about very much because I still stuff my anger, and anger still kind of means rage for me. But anger is protection. And with that, I think I'm about out of time. And I'd just like to say, if anybody's here and you're relatively new in essay, no matter what you feel or where you're at, and I know how much you hate being here, just keep coming back. That's all you need to do is keep coming back. You bring the body, the mind eventually shows up. Mine did. Sorta. Anyways, I love you all. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks again, Denise. Thanks for sharing with us.